"Mom, starting with your next paycheck, we are transferring all your money to my account." Those were the words my son, Bryce, spoke to me on a quiet Thursday afternoon. He said them as he sipped coffee in my kitchen, the sunlight streaming through the window and illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He said it with the casual air of someone discussing the weather, as if he were proposing a completely normal, even helpful arrangement. It was as if he were doing me a favor, as if at 62 years of age, I had suddenly become incapable of managing my own finances. I simply stared at him, the worn ceramic mug in my hands growing cold. I said nothing for a few long seconds, my mind a sudden silent storm. I searched his eyes, those same eyes I had gazed into for 34 years, looking for a hint of jest, a flicker of uncertainty, anything to explain why my own son, the boy I had raised entirely on my own, the man I had nourished with the sweat of my own labor, was now demanding total and absolute control of my bank account. But I found nothing. There was no hesitation, no empathy. All I saw was that placid, confident smile, the unnerving self-assurance of a person who believes they are entirely in control of the situation. So, I took a deep, steadying breath that did little to calm the tremor in my soul. And then I told him yes. I told him that it seemed fine, that I trusted him completely. Bryce's smile widened, a subtle but triumphant shift. He stood from the table, leaned over, and gave me a quick, mechanical kiss on the forehead. It was one of those empty gestures, a kiss that conveyed no affection, only the finality of a transaction completed. He told me it was for the best. He said I would no longer have to worry about a single thing, that he would handle everything, that this was, in his words, for my own good. Those 3 words, for my own good, hung in the air like a poisonous vapor long after he had walked out my door, leaving me alone in the sudden, deafening silence of my own home. That very evening, as the sun began to set, Bryce returned. It was a Friday, and as had become their unyielding routine, he was not alone. He arrived with his wife, just as they always did. He walked in expecting me to have dinner ready, the table to be set, a hot and, most importantly, free meal waiting for them, just as it had been every single Friday for the past 3 years. I heard them arrive. I heard their confident footsteps on the walkway outside. I heard the key I had given him, my key, turn in the lock of my door. I heard the door swing open, and then I heard the scream. It was not a sound of surprise. It was a high-pitched, desperate shriek. It was the raw, guttural sound of someone who had just witnessed something so profoundly unexpected it shattered their entire perception of reality. It was the cry of someone realizing, in a single, brutal moment, that things were not going to be the way they had planned. I remained seated in my wooden chair in the now empty kitchen, inside the now empty house, listening to that scream echo off the bare walls. I did not move. I did not go to see what was happening. I already knew precisely what was happening. Bryce burst into the kitchen, his face a mask of pale shock, his eyes wide with disbelief. His wife followed closely behind him, her expression a mirror of his own horror and bewilderment. "Mom!" Bryce yelled, his voice cracking with a mixture of confusion and rage. "Mom, what did you do? Where is everything? Where is the furniture? Where is the television? Where is everything that was here?" I looked at him calmly, with a newfound self-possession I did not know I possessed. I told him, in the softest, most measured voice I could find, that I had sold a few things, that I needed the cash. After all, I explained gently, if he was going to be handling my finances from now on, I thought it was prudent to make sure I had some money on hand first. The color of his face shifted instantly from pale to a deep, blotchy red, the color of pure, unadulterated fury. He took a menacing step toward me, and for the first time in my entire life, I saw my son for what he truly was. He was not the boy I had raised, not the young man I had helped build a life for. He was a stranger, an interloper in my home who looked at me with undisguised contempt, with a burning rage, and with something else, something that dangerously resembled hate. "You are crazy," he snapped, his voice low and threatening. "You are completely out of your mind. How could you sell our things without consulting me first? How are we supposed to watch television when we come over? How are we going to be comfortable here?" That last sentence, those 7 words changed everything. How are we going to be comfortable here? Not, how are you going to be comfortable, Mom? He was not worried about how this profound change affected me, his mother, living alone in an empty house. He was concerned only with how it would affect their comfort, as if my house were merely an extension of their own, as if my possessions existed solely for their convenience and entertainment. His wife then stepped forward. She looked at me with those eyes that had always seemed so cold and calculating, and she said something that I will never ever forget. She said that I was being selfish, that I was only thinking about myself, that they came over every single week to keep me company, to make sure I was doing well, and this was how I repaid their kindness. Selfish. Me. The woman who had worked double shifts for decades so that Bryce could attend a private university. The woman who had given up any chance of rebuilding her own life after his father abandoned us because she did not want her son to grow up with a stepfather. The woman who had lived in tiny apartments, worn second-hand clothes, and eaten the bare minimum so that he could have everything he ever needed or wanted. Selfish. Bryce just stood there staring at me as if I were a problem that needed to be solved, a faulty appliance that needed to be fixed. And then he said something that broke me in two. He said that maybe it had been a mistake to propose the bank account transfer, that maybe I was not in any condition to make good decisions for myself, that perhaps I needed more help than he had initially thought. More help, as if I were a burden, an incapable elderly woman who needed to be controlled for her own good. I stood up slowly from my chair. I looked at both of them, these two strangers standing in my empty kitchen, and I told them in a voice that came out louder and clearer than I had expected, that dinner was not ready, that there was no dinner, and that if they were hungry, they could go and eat somewhere else. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, and suffocating. Bryce stared at me as if he could not believe what he had just heard. His wife let out a dry, bitter laugh and mumbled something under her breath about respect and gratitude. And then Bryce spoke the final words, the ones that still echo in my head when I close my eyes at night. He said, with a coldness I had never known him to possess, that I should be careful. A woman my age, all alone, without family who truly cared about her, could end up in a very bad way. He said that he was the only thing I had in this world, and that I should remember that before I did anything else stupid. They left. They stormed out of my house, slamming doors behind them, leaving a trail of rage and veiled threats in their wake. I heard them get into their car. I heard the engine roar to life, and I listened as the sound of their departure faded into the night. I stood there, alone in my empty kitchen, in my empty house, and I felt something inside me permanently shatter. But it was not sadness I felt. It was not desperation. It was something entirely different. It was clarity. It was the absolute, soul-crushing certainty that my son did not love me, that perhaps he never had, that to him I was just a resource, a source of money, of food, of convenience. I sat back down in my chair. I looked at the bare walls of my living room. I looked at the empty spaces where the furniture I had bought with my own labor and effort once stood. And for the first time in a very long time, I smiled. Because Bryce did not know something. He did not know that I had not sold the furniture for money. I had sold it to send a message. I had sold it to see how he would react, to confirm what I already suspected deep down in my heart. And he had reacted exactly as I had expected him to, with rage, with indignation, with the entitled attitude of someone who feels they have a right to another person's things. That night, as I sat in the darkness of my empty house, I made a decision. I was not going to scream. I was not going to cry. I was not going to beg. I was going to do something much more powerful. I was going to observe. I was going to wait. I was going to let Bryce believe that he had won. And then, when he least expected it, when he was at his most confident, most sure of his control over me, I was going to show him who Eleanor Ellie Johnson truly was. Not the submissive, accommodating mother he thought he knew, but the woman who had survived a broken marriage, grinding poverty, and decades of grueling hard work. The woman who knew exactly how to protect herself. The woman he should never have underestimated. There was a time when I believed that being a mother was enough. That the love I gave so freely would be naturally returned, as if it were some immutable universal law. As if the sacrifices I made every single day, without complaint or fanfare, would build something solid, something unbreakable between my son and me. How wrong I was. How profoundly, devastatingly wrong. Bryce was born on a stormy night 34 years ago. His father, the man who had promised me a life together, a future filled with shared dreams, left when the boy was barely 2 years old. He said he was not ready to be a father, that he needed to find himself, and that one day I would understand. I never understood, but I also did not wait for him to return. I was left alone with a small child, a 2-bedroom apartment I could barely afford, and a secretarial job that paid $800 a month. It was not enough. It was never enough. So I took a second job cleaning offices at night. I would leave Bryce with my neighbor, Mrs. Bertha Washington, a kind, older lady who charged me $50 a week to watch him while I worked. My days were a blur of exhaustion. I worked from 7 in the morning until 6 in the evening at the office. I would rush home, feed Bryce, bathe him, read him a story, and put him to bed. Then, I would head out again at 9 at night to clean soulless office buildings until 2 in the morning. I slept 4 hours a night and then started the entire cycle all over again. I did this for years, so many years that I lost count. I remember Bryce always wanted the brand name sneakers that the other kids at school wore. They cost $100. At the time, I earned maybe $1,200 a month between both jobs. $100 was almost all the money I had for groceries for 2 weeks, but I bought them for him. I could not bear the thought of my son feeling less than anyone else. I wanted him to know that his mother would do anything for him. I ate rice and beans for an entire month to pay for those sneakers. When Bryce turned 18, he announced that he wanted to go to a private college that cost $10,000 a year. I did not have that money. I did not even have a tenth of that money saved. But I walked into the bank, my hands trembling, and I took out a loan. I went into debt for 4 full years of his education, a debt that I ended up paying off over the course of 10 long years. 10 years of paying a loan so my son could have a college degree and a better life than I had. He graduated, and he got a good job. He earned $6,000 a month, more than double what I made after 30 years of working. And I was happy. I was so incredibly happy. I thought that he could finally build his own life. I thought that I had finally done my job as a mother well, but Bryce did not move out right away. He said he wanted to save money, that he wanted to have a solid base before becoming independent. I told him, "Of course, this is your home. You can stay as long as you need." He stayed for 5 more years, 5 years where I kept working both of my jobs. 5 years where I continued to pay the rent, buy all the food, and cover all the utilities. 5 years where Bryce saved every single penny of his substantial salary because he did not have to pay for anything at all. When he finally left, it was not to rent an apartment. It was to buy a house, a $300,000 house that he paid for in cash because he had saved all his money during those 5 years of living for free in my home. I was proud. I told him I was proud, and I truly was. I thought I had done the right thing by helping him. I thought that now that he had his own house, maybe he could help me in return. Maybe I could finally work a little less, maybe I could finally rest a little. But that never happened. Bryce got married 2 years after moving out. His wife was an elegant woman, one of those who always dressed immaculately, always had perfect nails, and always spoke in a tone that sounded polite on the surface, but hid a certain undeniable coldness. I noticed from the very beginning that she looked at me differently, as if I were somehow inferior, as if she could not understand why Bryce came from someone like me. At their wedding, which cost $30,000, I sat at a back table, not at the head table with the rest of the family. Bryce explained that it was because there were a lot of important people there, clients from his work, and they needed those tables for them. I said I understood. I smiled in the photographs, I danced when I was asked to, and I went home alone that night feeling a strange and profound emptiness. After the wedding, Bryce's visits became less and less frequent. Before, he used to come see me 2 or 3 times a week. After he got married, he came once every 2 weeks, then once a month, always in a rush, always looking at his phone, always with some excuse to leave early. I did not say anything. I did not want to be the burdensome mother, the complaining mother, the mother who did not understand that her son had his own life now. But then they started coming on Friday nights, always around dinner time, always unannounced, and always expecting me to have food ready for them. At first, I was delighted. I thought Bryce finally wanted to spend quality time with me, that he finally missed me. So, I cooked his favorite dishes, I set the table nicely, I even bought dessert. But I began to notice something. I noticed that Bryce never came alone. He always brought his wife. and I noticed that they never came to chat, they came to eat. They would arrive, sit down, eat their meal, and then leave. Sometimes they stayed for an hour, sometimes less. I also noticed that he never brought anything. Never a bottle of wine, never a dessert, never any money to help with the cost of the food. Nothing. One night after they had left, I calculated how much I had spent on the dinner. It was $15. $15 was money I did not have to spare. $15 meant that I would have to work extra hours just to compensate. And I realized something with a sickening clarity. I realized that for Bryce, I had become a service. A free restaurant, a place where he could come to eat without paying, without even truly saying thank you. I began to notice other things, too. I noticed that when I asked him for help with something, he always had an excuse. When I needed him to take me to the doctor because my old car was broken, he was always too busy. When I mentioned that my refrigerator was making strange noises and I was afraid it would break soon, he told me to just buy a new one, as if I had $500 saved for emergencies. I did not. I barely had enough money to make it to the end of the month. But the worst was my birthday, my 60th birthday. Bryce arrived 2 hours late with no gift, no card, and a flimsy excuse about traffic. He stayed for 20 minutes. He ate the cake that I had bought for myself because I did not want to spend the day completely alone, and then he left. I cried that night. I cried like I had not cried in years, because I finally understood something that I had been denying for far too long. I understood that to my son, I was no longer important. I was just a resource, something that was there, available, waiting to be used whenever he needed it, and the worst part was that I had allowed it. I had set that pattern. I had never asked him for anything in return. I had never told him that I felt used. I had never told him that I needed more from him than just 20-minute visits and free Friday night dinners. I was afraid. I was terrified that if I complained, if I asked for more, if I demanded to be treated with respect, he would disappear from my life completely. And the idea of losing my son, even this version of my son who barely saw me, terrified me more than anything else in the world. So I continued to be the convenient mother, the silent mother, the mother who was always there, who always had her door open, who never caused any trouble. Until that Thursday afternoon, until Bryce told me he wanted to manage my money. Something inside me, something that had been dormant for years, finally woke up. A small but clear voice in my head that told me this was not right, that this was the beginning of something much, much worse. But even then, even with that voice whispering in my head, I told him yes, because I still had a sliver of hope. I still wanted to believe that my son loved me, that he wanted to protect me, that he would do the right thing. How foolish I was. The following Monday, Bryce came to my house with papers. Lots and lots of papers. He spread them out on my kitchen table with that same smile that now seemed different to me, less warm, more calculated. "Mom, this is simple," he said, his voice smooth and reassuring. "I just need you to sign here, here, and here. These are the documents so I can have access to your account, so I can automatically transfer your salary every month. That way, I will take care of paying your bills, managing everything. You will not have to worry about a thing." I looked at the papers. They were official bank forms, authorization forms filled with dense legal jargon. I read the fine print, the parts that most people usually ignore, and I saw something that chilled my blood. It was not just access to my account. It was a full power of attorney. It was the authority to make transfers, to close accounts, to make any and all financial decisions on my behalf without my consent. "Bryce, this says you would have total control over all my money," I told him, my voice barely a whisper. He nodded, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "Yes, Mom. It is easier that way. That way I can handle everything without having to ask you for authorization every single time. It is for practicality." Practicality. That word echoed in my head. Practicality for whom? I wondered, but I did not say it out loud. I took the pen he offered me. I held it in my hand, and for a long moment, I was about to sign. I was about to give him everything, because that is what I had always done. Trust, surrender, believe. But then I remembered Friday night. I remembered his face contorted in fury when he saw the empty house. I remembered his cruel words. I remembered how he had threatened me, even though he probably did not even realize it was a threat. I put the pen down on the table. You know what, Bryce? Give me a few days to think about it. I want to read everything calmly. I want to be sure. His expression changed for just a second. A flash of pure irritation crossed his face before he quickly masked it with another smile. Mom, there is nothing to think about. It is simple, but okay, if you want to take a few days, that is fine. He left then, but he left the papers on my table, as if assuming that I would eventually sign them anyway. I could not sleep that night. I stayed up staring at those papers on my kitchen table, and something deep inside me told me that this was not for my own good, that this was the beginning of something that I would not be able to reverse once it started. The next day, I went to the bank. I went early, before my job. I asked the teller to review my account, to show me all the transactions for the last 6 months. She printed out the papers. They were several pages long. I reviewed them carefully, line by line, and then I saw it. I saw it, and I felt the floor move beneath my feet. There was a withdrawal that I had not made. A withdrawal of $1,200 from 3 months ago. $1,200 that had simply vanished from my account, and I had no memory of taking it out. I asked the teller if she could see more details about the transaction. She checked her computer and told me something that took my breath away. She said the withdrawal had been made at a branch across town, using my debit card. But I had never been to that branch, and my card was in my wallet. It had always been in my wallet, except for one time. I remembered then. I remembered that 3 months ago, Bryce had come to visit. I was in the shower when he arrived. I yelled for him to come in, that the door was open. When I came out, he was waiting for me in the living room. We sat down to chat, and at some point, I went to the kitchen to make coffee. My wallet was in my purse. My purse was in the living room, alone with Bryce. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I felt the whole world tilting strangely, because this could only mean one thing. It meant that my own son had taken my card, memorized or photographed the numbers, and withdrawn a large sum of money from my account without my permission. I asked the teller if there was any way to know exactly what had happened with that withdrawal. She told me that I would need to file a formal claim, that the bank would investigate, and that it could take several weeks. I told her I would think about it, and I left the bank feeling like I no longer knew my own son. But I did not file the claim, not yet, because I needed to be sure. I needed to know if this had been just a one-time thing, or if there was more. I spent the next few days checking everything. Every piece of paper I had in my house, every document, every old bank statement that I had kept in a box in the back of my closet, and I found more things. I found that 2 years ago, when I was in the hospital with a severe case of pneumonia, someone had used my health insurance for consultations I had not made, appointments at clinics I did not know, consultations that had completely exhausted my annual coverage, which was why I had had to pay out of pocket for some of my medications that year. I also found a credit card statement in my name that I did not remember applying for. A card with a balance of $3,000. $3,000 in purchases that I had not made at stores I had never been to. I called the credit card company. I asked them when the account had been opened. They told me it was 18 months ago. I asked if they could tell me where the purchases had been made. They gave me a list. Hardware stores, electronics shops, home furnishing stores. Bryce had bought a house 2 years ago. Bryce had renovated that house, and apparently, Bryce had used my credit to do it. I sat on the floor of my room, surrounded by a mountain of papers, feeling everything I had ever believed about my life crumble around me. It was not just about the money. It was the betrayal. It was knowing that my son had been systematically robbing me for years, that he had viewed me as nothing more than an unlimited resource, that he had never intended to care for me or protect me. I cried until I had no more tears left. Then I wiped my face, gathered all the papers, and I made a decision. I was not going to confront him yet. I was not going to yell or accuse him, because I knew that if I did, he would deny everything. He would say that I was confused. He would say that I was getting senile. He would say anything to make me doubt my own memory, my own sanity. No, I was going to be smarter than that. I was going to gather evidence. I was going to document everything. I was going to build a case so solid that he could not possibly deny it. And then, only then, would I act. On Friday of that week, Bryce came back as always at dinner time, as always expecting me to have food ready. But this time, I had cooked differently. I had made his favorite dish, chicken and rice. the same meal I used to make for him when he was a boy and came home sad from school. The dish that told him how much I loved him without needing any words. He sat at the table with his wife. They ate. They talked about superficial things, their work, the weather, the new movie they wanted to see. I watched them. I watched them as if I were seeing them for the very first time, and I realized something. I realized that Bryce ate my food with the same indifference he would eat fast food. There was no gratitude in his eyes, no love, just the mechanical act of consuming something that was free. When they finished, Bryce pulled out the bank papers again. He placed them on the table, right next to his empty plate. "Mom, the days you asked for are up. You have thought about it, right? Sign this, and I will take care of everything." I looked him straight in the eyes and told him, in the calmest voice I could find, that I was still not sure, that I needed more time. His wife scoffed. "Ellie, this is ridiculous. Bryce is just trying to help you. I do not understand why you are being so distrustful." Distrustful. She called me distrustful. And the saddest part was that she was right, but not in the way she thought. Bryce stood up. His expression was hard now, without the mask of a smile. "Mom, this is for your own good. You cannot keep managing your finances alone. It is obvious. Look at how you sold the furniture without thinking. Look at the irrational decisions you are making. Irrational. Selling my own furniture in my own house was irrational, but robbing me for years was not." I did not say anything. I just held his gaze until he looked away. They left that night without saying goodbye. And I stayed seated in my kitchen, staring at those unsigned papers, knowing that the war was just beginning. A silent war, a war I had to win. Because if I lost it, I would not just lose my money. I would lose my dignity, my autonomy, my very life. The days after that dinner grew strange. Bryce did not call again. He did not visit again. It was as if he had decided to punish me with his absence, as if he believed that I would break down without him, that I would eventually beg him to return, that I would finally sign those papers just to get his attention back. But I did not break down. For the first time in years, the silence of my house did not feel empty. It felt full of something different. It felt full of clarity. I spent those days reviewing every single detail of my financial life, every receipt I had ever saved, every bank statement, every piece of paper that had any connection to money. And the more I checked, the more I found. I discovered that 3 years ago, when Bryce had asked to borrow my identification because he claimed he had lost his and needed to pick up an urgent package, he had done something more with it. He had opened a utility account in my name at an address that was not mine. His house. For 3 years, the electricity bill for Bryce's house had been in my name. And when he did not pay on time, the penalties piled up on my credit score. That was why I had been denied a small loan last year when my car needed urgent repairs. That was why my credit score had mysteriously dropped for no apparent reason. I called the utility company. I explained that the account was not mine, that I had never lived at that address. The woman on the phone told me that I needed to file an affidavit, that I had to report this as identity fraud. Identity fraud committed by my own son. I hung up the phone and stared at the wall for a long time, trying to process how I had reached this point, trying to understand when my son had turned into this monster. I could not sleep that night. I stayed awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the city outside. And I thought about all the times I had justified his behavior, all the times I had told myself that he was busy, that he had his own life, that I was being too demanding by expecting more from him. But this was not about expectations. This was about theft, about deception, about a son who viewed his mother as a resource he could exploit without any consequence. The next morning, I did something I had never done before. I went to see a lawyer. It was a small, unassuming office downtown. The sign on the door read David Chung, attorney at law. I had seen an ad for him in the local paper offering free initial consultations. I walked in feeling small, feeling ridiculous, a woman of 62 coming to complain about her own son. But the receptionist smiled kindly and showed me into his office. David Chung was a man in his 50s with graying temples and kind, intelligent eyes. He asked me to tell him everything, and so I did. I told him about the missing money, the credit card I had not applied for, the utility account, the power of attorney papers that Bryce wanted me to sign. He listened patiently, without interrupting. He took notes in a yellow legal notepad, and when I finally finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, his voice calm and serious, "what you are describing is financial fraud and abuse of trust. If you sign those papers your son is asking for, you are giving him total legal access to all of your money. He could empty everything, and you would have no legal recourse because you gave him permission yourself." The words fell on me like stones. I knew it deep down, I knew it, but hearing it spoken aloud by a legal professional made it real in a terrifying new way. "What can I do?" I asked, my voice trembling. He leaned forward. "First, do not sign anything. Second, you need to report the credit card fraud and the theft from your bank account immediately. Third, you need to change all your passwords, your personal identification numbers, everything. Fourth, you should consider getting a restraining order if you feel you are in any danger. A restraining order against my own son. The idea seemed absurd and devastating at the same time. "I do not want to get him into legal trouble," I said quietly. "He is my son." The lawyer looked at me with what seemed like a mixture of compassion and sadness. "Mrs. Johnson, your son is already in legal trouble. He has committed several felonies. The question is not whether you want to get him into trouble. The question is whether you want to protect yourself." I left that office with a folder full of forms and a long list of things I needed to do. I felt overwhelmed, but I also felt something else. I felt a flicker of determination. I went straight to the bank. I changed all my passwords. I requested a new debit card. I closed the fraudulent credit card account, and I filed a formal dispute for the unauthorized withdrawal. The bank teller helped me with everything. She treated me with patience and respect without making me feel stupid or weak. When I arrived home that afternoon, I felt exhausted, but also strangely light, as if an invisible weight that I had been carrying for years had finally been lifted from my shoulders. That night, Bryce finally called. His voice sounded strained on the phone. "Mom, we need to talk. Come to my house for dinner tomorrow. We have to resolve this." It was not an invitation. It was an order, and before I would have obeyed without question. But now, after everything I had discovered, I felt only a cold calm. "I cannot tomorrow," I told him. "I am busy." "Busy? Mom, what could you possibly be busy with?" "What I am busy with is important to me," I said, my voice steady. "There are other things that matter more to me now." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, a silence heavy with surprise and irritation. "You are acting really weird, Mom. I do not know what is wrong with you, but you need to stop being so stubborn and sign those papers. This is for your own good." "For my own good?" Those words again, as if robbing me were an act of love. "Bryce," I said, with a voice that came out firmer than I expected, "I am not signing anything, and I think we need to have a very serious conversation about a few things." "About what things?" he asked. His voice sounded different now, more alert, more cautious. "About money that has left my account without my permission, about credit cards that I did not apply for, about utility accounts in my name at addresses where I do not live." The silence that followed was absolute, so thick I could almost feel it through the phone. "I do not know what you are talking about," he finally said. His voice sounded controlled, but I could detect the panic underneath. "I think you do know," I told him. "And I think you need to think very carefully about what you are going to say next." "Mom, you are delusional. You are confused. Maybe you need to see a doctor." There it was. The card I knew he would play. The card of making me seem senile, confused, incapable. "I am not confused, Bryce. I have all the papers. I have all the evidence, and I have already spoken with a lawyer." Another silence, this one longer, heavier. "You talked to a lawyer?" His voice was almost a whisper now, almost a threat. "Yes. And he explained to me exactly what you have been doing. He explained what fraud is. He explained what is illegal. Mom, you cannot be serious. I am your son. Everything I have done has been to help you." "Help me, Bryce? You robbed me for years. You used me. You lied to me." "I never," he started to say, but I cut him off. "Yes, you did, and you know it. The question now is what we are going to do about it." I heard his breathing on the other end of the line, heavy, ragged. "I am coming over," he said. "We need to talk in person." "No," I told him firmly. "You are not coming here. If you want to talk, we can do it over the phone or we can do it with our lawyers present." "Are you crazy?" he yelled. "Completely crazy. After everything I have done for you, after all the times I have come to see you, that I have worried about you, this is how you repay me. All the times you came to eat for free, you mean? All the times you needed something from me, but the times I needed you, where were you?" I hung up then, before he could answer, before he could manipulate me again with his empty words. I stayed seated in my kitchen with the phone in my hand, trembling, but not from fear. It was from rage, from years and years of suppressed rage that was finally finding its voice. I slept better that night than I had in months, because I had finally spoken the truth. I had finally defended my territory. And although I did not know what would come next, I knew that I was no longer going to be the silent mother who allowed herself to be trampled. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I had not felt in years. It was as if a thick fog had lifted from my mind, and now I could see everything with an almost painful sharpness. I knew what I had to do. I knew I could not stop now. After a simple breakfast, I grabbed my purse and left the house. I had a mental list of all the places I needed to visit, all the loose ends I needed to tie up. If Bryce thought I was a confused, helpless old woman, he was about to find out just how wrong he was. My first stop was the main bank where I kept my savings account. This was not the checking account where I received my paycheck, but the other one, the one I had opened 30 years ago when I still had dreams of buying a house of my own someday. I had $20,000 saved there. It was not much after a lifetime of work, but it was mine. I asked the bank manager to close the account. She asked if I was sure, if there was a problem. I told her I just wanted to make some changes to my financial arrangements. She gave me the money in a cashier's check and recommended that I open a new account at a different bank for greater security. I followed her advice. I went to a different bank, one across town, one where Bryce had never been with me. I opened a new account, an account that only I knew about, an account where he could never find my money. Then, I went to the utility company. I presented all the documents that David Chung had helped me prepare, the affidavit, the copy of my identification, the proof that I had never lived at the address where the fraudulent account was registered. The woman who assisted me checked everything and told me that they would start an investigation, that the account would be transferred to the correct name or closed, and that I would no longer be held responsible for the debt. I felt as if an invisible chain had been taken off my shoulders. My next stop was the credit bureau. I requested a full, detailed report of my credit history. I wanted to see everything. I wanted to know if there were more things that Bryce had done behind my back. The employee handed me a thick document. I sat in the waiting room and read it, page by page. And there was another thing I did not know about. A personal loan for $5,000, applied for in my name 2 years ago. A loan that had never been fully paid off and was now in collections. $5,000. I felt the rage rise back up my throat like bile. I marked every fraudulent item on the report with a bright yellow highlighter. I filled out the dispute forms one by one with clear, firm handwriting. When I left that office, it was nearly 3 p.m. I had not eaten anything since breakfast, but I was not hungry. I had something stronger than hunger. I had purpose. I then went to the house of my neighbor, Mrs. Bertha Washington. She was 70 years old and had lived in the building since before I did. We had been friends for decades, although we had grown distant over the last few years. I had been so focused on Bryce, so consumed with trying to maintain that fragile relationship, that I had neglected my other connections. I knocked on her door. She opened it with surprise on her face. "Ellie, what a surprise. Come in, come in." We went into her cozy living room. She offered me coffee, and I accepted. We sat down, and she looked at me with those wise, kind eyes that had seen a lot in life. "You look different," she said. "I do not know what it is, but there is something different about you." And then I told her everything. I told her about Bryce, about the money, about the betrayal, about everything I had discovered. I talked for almost an hour without stopping, and she listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally with an expression that mixed sadness and something that looked like recognition. When I finished, she sighed deeply. "Ellie, I knew something was not right. I saw it every Friday when he came, the way he treated you, like you were a service. But I did not say anything because it was not my place, but I am so glad that you are finally seeing the truth." She took my hand in hers. Her fingers were cool, but her grip was firm and reassuring. "I need to ask you a favor," I said. "I need you to be my witness." I need that if Bryce comes and tries to say that I am confused, that I am senile, you can confirm that is not true, that I am in full possession of my faculties." She nodded without any hesitation. "Of course, Ellie. And more than that, if you need a place to stay, if you ever do not feel safe in your own house, my door is always open." Those words filled me with such a deep gratitude that they almost made me cry, but I did not cry. I had cried enough. Now it was time to act. That night, back in my house, I organized all the documents I had collected. I put them in a large folder. I made copies of everything. I stored the originals in a safe place, and I left the copies in the folder. If something happened to me, if Bryce tried to do anything, there would be evidence. There would be proof. I also wrote a letter, a long letter detailing everything I had discovered, everything Bryce had done. I put it in a sealed envelope with instructions that it should only be opened in case of an emergency. I gave it to Mrs. Bertha to hold on to for safekeeping. I was preparing myself like a general preparing for battle because I knew that Bryce was not going to let this go. I knew he would come, that he would try to manipulate me, to convince me, to make me doubt myself. But I was no longer the same woman I had been 2 weeks ago. That woman had died the night Bryce threatened me in my own kitchen. The woman I was now was different. She was stronger, clearer, more determined. On Wednesday afternoon, as I was making a cup of tea, I heard a car stop in front of my building. I looked out the window and saw Bryce's car. He got out, along with his wife. They looked determined. They were coming to confront me. I took a deep breath, I put away my cup of tea, and I waited. The doorbell rang once, then twice, then a third time, each ring more insistent than the last. I opened the door, but I did not invite them in. I stood on the threshold, blocking the entrance. "We need to talk," Bryce said. His voice was hard, with no pretense of kindness. "I am listening," I told him. "Inside, Mom. We are not going to talk in the hallway. We do not have anything to talk about inside. Whatever you have to say, you can say it right here." His wife scoffed. "This is ridiculous, Ellie. Stop acting like we are enemies." "You are not enemies," I replied, my voice steady. "Enemies are honest about their hostility. You are worse. You are thieves hiding behind pretty words." Bryce took a step toward me, his face red with fury. "How dare you? After everything I have done for you, everything you have done for me, Bryce, I have the records. I have the proof. I know exactly how much money you have stolen from me. I know about the fraudulent credit cards. I know about the utility account. I know about everything." He froze. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "And now," I continued, with a calmness that surprised even myself, "you have 2 options. Either you give me back everything you stole, every single cent, or I go to the police and I press charges for fraud." "You cannot do that," his wife said, her voice laced with panic. "He is your son." "Precisely why it hurts so much," I replied. "Because he is my son. Because I gave him everything, and he repaid me by robbing me." Bryce finally found his voice. "You owe me," he shouted, his voice echoing in the hallway. "My whole life I grew up without a father. My whole life I had to watch you work and be tired. That was your fault. You chose to have me. You chose to stay alone. I did not ask to be born." His words landed like punches, but they no longer hurt the way they used to, because now I could see them for what they were: justifications, excuses from someone who knew he had done something unforgivable and was desperately trying to shift the blame. "You are right," I told him. "I chose to have you, and it was the best decision of my life, until it stopped being the best. But that does not give you the right to steal from me. That does not give you the right to exploit me. I did not steal anything. I just took what was owed to me. Nothing was owed to you, Bryce. I gave you everything you needed when you were a child. Once you became an adult, it was no longer my obligation. And it was definitely not my obligation to give you access to my money without my knowledge." His wife grabbed his arm. "Let us go. It is not worth it. She has already lost her mind." Lost my mind? What an interesting choice of words. As if I were the one who was wrong. As if defending my own money and my own dignity were a form of madness. They left then. They walked down the stairs without looking back, and I closed the door, feeling strangely at peace. That night, David Chung called me. He told me the banks had confirmed the fraud, that the credit card debt would be canceled, that they were investigating the unauthorized withdrawals, and that I had a solid case if I chose to press criminal charges. I thanked him and hung up. I sat in my empty living room, in my house that no longer had a television or fancy furniture, and for the first time in a long, long time I felt rich in something that money could not buy. Rich in dignity, in strength, in the absolute certainty that I was finally doing the right thing. The days that followed that confrontation at my door were strangely silent, as if the whole world were holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I found myself caught in a kind of emotional limbo, where the simmering rage and the deep pain mixed with a growing sense of liberation that I did not quite know how to fully process. Bryce did not call again. He did not show up at my door again. And for the first time in years, I was not constantly waiting for his contact. I was not checking my phone every hour to see if there was a message from him. I was not inventing excuses in my mind to justify his absence or his silence. But although he was not physically present in my life during those days, his digital presence was impossible to ignore. Something in me, a morbid curiosity perhaps, led me to check his social media, something I normally would not do, as it always seemed like an invasion of privacy, even for a mother. But now, I felt I had the right to know what he was doing, what he was saying, how he was presenting his life to the world, while I was dealing with the devastating consequences of his actions in private. What I found took my breath away with its audacity, its absolute, shocking disconnection between reality and the image he was meticulously projecting outward. He had posted a photograph the day after our confrontation, a picture of him and his wife at a fancy, expensive restaurant, smiling brightly at the camera with large glasses of red wine in their hands. The caption said something about celebrating the release of toxic energy from one's life and surrounding oneself only with people who add value. As if I, his mother, were the toxicity he needed to liberate himself from. As if my refusal to allow myself to be robbed any further was some kind of negativity that he had the wisdom and strength to eliminate from his existence. The comments below the photo were universally positive, all congratulating him for protecting his peace of mind, for setting healthy boundaries, for prioritizing his emotional well-being. I stared at the screen, feeling a sickening mix of disbelief and disgust, because all those people supporting him had no idea that the man they were celebrating as a paragon of self-care had been systematically robbing his own mother for years. There were more posts in the following days, each one more elaborate and self-congratulatory than the last, as if Bryce were deliberately constructing a public narrative of his life that had absolutely nothing to do with the truth. There was a photo of him at the gym with a long reflection on self-care and the importance of investing in oneself before being able to help others. Words that sounded deep and meaningful until you remembered that this was the same man who had likely used money stolen from his mother to buy gym memberships and expensive sportswear. There was another photo of him working on his computer, with a comment about the sacrifice and hard work it takes to build a successful future, without mentioning that a significant part of this future had been financed with fraudulent credit cards in my name and utility accounts that I was unknowingly paying for. But what impacted me the most was a post he made that Friday, exactly the day he would normally have come to my house for dinner. It was a post where he shared an old photograph of him and me when he was a child, a photograph I did not even know he had. A photograph where I was holding him in my arms when he was perhaps 5 years old, and we were both smiling, genuinely happy. The text accompanying the photo was a long, rambling diatribe about how sometimes the people you love the most are the ones who hurt you the most, about how he had learned that love does not mean tolerating abusive behavior, about how he had made the difficult, painful decision to distance himself from a toxic family relationship for the sake of his own mental health. Reading those words, I felt as if someone had punched me in the stomach. Bryce had taken our history, our real, complicated, and painful relationship, and completely inverted it, presenting himself as the victim and me as the abuser. The comments on that post were even more abundant than the previous ones. Dozens of people expressing their unwavering support, telling him how brave he was for setting those boundaries, sharing their own stories of difficult family relationships, completely and utterly validating his fabricated version of events. There were people I knew in those comments. Neighbors who had known him when he lived with me. Co-workers who had come to parties at my house years ago. all of them offering words of encouragement and solidarity without the slightest idea that the person he supposedly needed to protect himself from was the same woman who had worked 2 jobs for years to give him the very education he now. I used to get his well-paying job. For several days, I watched this digital spectacle unfold in silence, without commenting, without publicly reacting in any way, because something in me knew that this was exactly the game Bryce was playing. If I responded emotionally, if I called him a liar, I would be falling right into his trap, giving him more ammunition for his narrative that I was the unstable, problematic mother he needed to distance himself from. But every new post, every new comment of support he received from people who did not know the truth was like a small wound opening deep inside me. Not because I cared what those people thought of me specifically, but because it hurt to see how easily people believed a well-told story without ever questioning if there might be another side to the events. The final straw came when Bryce posted a story on his account, a video tour of the house he and his wife had bought, showcasing the extensive renovations they had done, the new furniture they had acquired, the perfectly designed garden, all presented as the fruit of their own hard work and dedication. There was not a single mention of the fact that a significant part of all this luxury had been paid for with money that was not his, with credit that had been fraudulently obtained using my personal information. He displayed it all with so much pride, so much self-satisfaction, as if he truly believed that he had earned it all himself, as if he had completely forgotten, or simply did not care, that every brick of that house was partially built on the sacrifice and theft from his own mother. I watched him live his life in those small, curated digital windows, and I wondered how it was possible for someone to sleep at night knowing what they had done. How was it possible to maintain that facade of a successful, ethically correct person while simultaneously committing fraud and theft against the very person who gave him life? I wondered if he ever felt a pang of guilt, if ever in the middle of one of those fancy dinners at expensive restaurants or during one of those grueling gym workouts. He stopped for a moment and thought about his mother, sitting alone in an empty house after having to sell her furniture just to be able to eat, because her own son had been systematically robbing her for years. But looking at his posts, seeing the ease with which he built and maintained this perfect public image, I came to understand something fundamental about Bryce, something I may have always known on some deep, subconscious level but had never wanted to fully admit to myself. And that was that my son had developed the chilling ability to create parallel realities in his mind. In one reality, he could be simultaneously the abandoned son who deserved compensation for his difficult childhood, and the successful man who had built everything himself through sheer hard work. In another, he could justify theft as something he was rightfully owed, while publicly presenting himself as a victim of family toxicity. It was a form of cognitive dissonance so profound that it almost seemed as if he genuinely believed his own lies, as if he had constructed such an elaborate narrative in his head that the line between truth and fiction had been completely and irrevocably erased. And as I watched all this from the silent distance of my empty house, something inside me hardened even more than it already had. Because seeing Bryce not only steal from me but also steal my story, completely inverting the roles of victim and perpetrator in his public presentation of events, made me understand that there was no possible redemption here. There was no conversation I could have with him that would make him see the reality of what he had done. He had chosen his path. He had chosen the lie over the truth. He had chosen image over substance. And I needed to accept that the son I had raised and loved had either never really existed in the way I believed, or had been completely and utterly replaced by this stranger who could smile for the camera while destroying his own mother in private, apparently without feeling any genuine remorse whatsoever. The moment of reckoning came on a Tuesday afternoon, in a way I had not planned, but which in retrospect I realized had been inevitable from the beginning. Because the truth, I have learned, always finds its way to the light, no matter how many layers of lies are piled on top of it, trying to keep it buried in the darkness. I was in David Chung's office, reviewing the final case documents. He informed me that the banks had completed their investigations and had confirmed a total of $17,000 in fraudulent transactions over a period of 3 years. A sum that took my breath away, not so much because of the number itself, but because of what it represented in terms of cold, calculated planning and premeditation. This had not been a mistake or a single moment of weakness. This had been a systematic and deliberate operation of theft that had required constant effort and dedication on Bryce's part. The lawyer explained that with this irrefutable evidence, I had more than enough to press criminal charges, but that there was also another option I might want to consider before making that final, life-altering decision. That option was to send a formal demand letter to Bryce, giving him one last opportunity to return the stolen money and compensate for the damages before proceeding with more severe legal action. He told me that this was a courtesy many victims of family fraud offered because they understood that no matter how serious the crime, there were still complex family ties that complicated the situation in ways that did not apply to cases of fraud committed by strangers. But he also warned me that this courtesy could be seen as a sign of weakness by the perpetrator, and that I needed to be prepared for the possibility that Bryce would respond not with gratitude or remorse, but with more manipulation and denial. I thought about it for several long minutes, sitting there in the lawyer's quiet office, looking at all the documents scattered across the desk that meticulously detailed every fraudulent transaction, every unauthorized account, every lie my son had carefully constructed over the years. I realized that a small, irrational part of me still harbored a faint hope that if Bryce were confronted with the cold, hard, irrefutable evidence of what he had done, maybe something in him would finally awaken. Maybe he would find some vestige of a conscience, or a flicker of remorse, or at least the basic human decency to acknowledge that he had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. That part of me, the part that was still his mother despite everything, wanted to give him that one last opportunity to do the right thing, to correct his mistake, to show that somewhere deep inside him, the person I had raised with so much love and sacrifice still existed. But there was another part of me, a new part that was stronger and clearer, that knew exactly what Bryce would do with that opportunity. And that part knew that he would not take it as an extension of grace, but as a confirmation that I was too weak to truly harm him, that he could continue manipulating and controlling me because at the end of the day, I would always give in because I was his mother, and mothers always forgive, always give another chance, always choose love over justice. That part of me understood that giving him a private warning would only give him more time to prepare his defense, to hide more evidence, to build an even more elaborate narrative of victimization that he could use publicly to destroy my credibility before I could ever act. I looked at David Chung and I told him that I did not want to send a private letter. That I did not want to give Bryce the opportunity to respond in private, where he could continue to control the narrative and manipulate the situation in his favor. Instead, I asked him to prepare the necessary documents to file a formal civil lawsuit, a lawsuit that would become a public record, where anyone who wanted to verify the truth could do so, instead of simply believing the distorted version of events that Bryce had been so carefully constructing on his social media. The lawyer nodded, with what appeared to be a mixture of surprise and respect, because he probably did not expect a woman my age to make such a direct and unambiguous decision. He told me that he would proceed immediately with the preparation of all the necessary documents and that Bryce would be officially notified of the lawsuit within the next 72 hours. I left that office feeling something I had not felt in a long, long time. Something I could not initially identify until I realized that it was power. The power of having made a decision completely by myself, without consulting anyone, without asking for permission, without worrying about how it would make me look to others, or whether people would think I was being too hard on my own son. For the first time in decades, I had chosen to protect myself over protecting another person's feelings or reputation, even when that person was my son. And that choice, although painful, filled me with a sense of integrity that I had forgotten it was possible to feel. The notification reached Bryce on a Thursday morning, as David Chung confirmed to me by phone. Although I was not there to witness his initial reaction, I could perfectly imagine the moment he opened that official-looking envelope and read the legal documents detailing every fraudulent transaction, every unauthorized account, every single dollar he had stolen, meticulously documented with dates and bank reference numbers that made any form of denial impossible. I did not have to wait long to confirm my imagination, because less than 2 hours after receiving the notification, my phone started ringing with an insistence that bordered on desperation. Call after call, which I let go to voicemail without answering, because I had nothing left to say to Bryce that was not already contained in those legal documents. I listened to the voicemails later that night, when I finally felt emotionally prepared to do so. And it was fascinating, in a deeply disturbing way, to listen to the progression of his panic through each successive message. The first one still tried to maintain some semblance of composure, with that controlled, reasonable voice he used when trying to manipulate a situation, telling me that this was all a terrible misunderstanding, that we needed to talk immediately before things got any more out of control. The second message already had a different tone, sharper, more urgent, where he pleaded with me to call him, that this was going to ruin his life, that I should please think about what I was doing before I destroyed my own son, as if I were the one destroying something, instead of simply revealing the destruction that he himself had caused over the course of many years. By the fifth message, Bryce was no longer trying to sound reasonable or appeal to my maternal compassion. He had completely devolved into pure, unfiltered rage and barely veiled threats, telling me that I was going to regret this, that he had his own lawyers who would prove that I was a senile old woman who did not know what I was doing, that he was going to fight this with everything he had, and that in the end, I was going to be the one who looked like the villain in this story. I listened to every single message until the end, without allowing myself to feel anything more than a kind of clinical curiosity about how a person could transition so quickly from pleading to threatening when they realized their usual manipulation tactics no longer worked. The following days were a whirlwind of legal and emotional activity. Because Bryce did not stand still. He began his own counterattack campaign, starting by publishing a long and elaborate statement on his social media about how he was being victimized by a terrible injustice perpetrated by a mother he supposedly loved, but who was now legally attacking him for reasons he could not fully comprehend. His post was carefully worded to generate the maximum amount of sympathy without mentioning any of the specific details of the accusations against him, painting himself as the confused and heartbroken son who was being dragged through a traumatic legal process by a mother who might be experiencing age-related mental health issues. The response to his post was exactly what he had expected, with dozens of comments expressing shock and solidarity, telling him to keep his head up, that the truth would eventually prevail, that they were on his side no matter what. And I watched all of this from a distance, with a mixture of awe and revulsion at his incredible ability to manipulate the narrative, even when faced with documented legal charges. But something had changed in me, because this time, his public theater did not affect me in the same way it had before. This time, I knew that I had something more powerful than his carefully constructed words, and that something was irrefutable legal documents that could not be manipulated with emotional rhetoric or appeals to sympathy. Bryce's real collapse began when his own lawyers reviewed the evidence against him and apparently told him something he did not want to hear. His social media posts suddenly stopped, abruptly, and the silence that followed was deafening in its eloquence. David Chung informed me that Bryce's legal representatives had contacted him, asking about the possibility of reaching an out-of-court settlement, which basically confirmed that they knew he had no real defense against the mountain of evidence I had presented, and that his best option was to try to minimize the damage before this proceeded to a public trial, where all the dirty details would be revealed in public access documents for the whole world to see. That is when the cracks in Bryce's carefully constructed life began to show. Apparently, some of his closest friends had started asking uncomfortable questions after his wife casually mentioned at a social gathering that they were dealing with a complicated family legal problem. Once people started digging a little deeper, they discovered the public lawsuit documents detailing the specific accusations of financial fraud. Mrs. Bertha told me that she had heard from other neighbors that Bryce's name was being mentioned in neighborhood conversations in ways that were definitely not flattering, that the people who had once seen him as the successful, educated son who had made it in the world now looked at him with suspicion and distrust. His wife was apparently furious, not necessarily about the moral implications of what Bryce had done, but about the devastating damage to their precious social reputation. According to the rumors that reached my ears through the neighborhood gossip network, there had been considerable loud fights in their house about how to handle this situation. Bryce tried to call me several more times during those weeks, but I maintained my absolute silence, because there was nothing he could say that could possibly change the documented facts of what he had done. And my silence apparently was more devastating to him than any angry word I could have ever said, because it meant that I had moved completely from anger to indifference, and that indifference was the final death of any power he once held over me. The final settlement was reached 3 months after I filed the lawsuit, and the terms were exactly what David Chung and I had established as the minimum acceptable. Bryce had no choice but to accept when his own lawyers explained that going to trial would mean not only the complete public revelation of all the sordid fraud details, but also the very real possibility of criminal charges that could result in jail time. He had to return the full $17,000, plus an additional $5,000 in compensation for damages and injuries, in addition to paying all the fees for cleaning up my credit and all of my attorney's fees. And all of this had to be paid within a period of 6 months, with verifiable monthly payments, or the agreement would automatically be invalidated and criminal charges would proceed without any further warning. But beyond the money, which honestly had never been the main point of all this for me, the agreement included a clause that I had insisted on adding, a clause which David Chung initially thought was unnecessary, but which for me was absolutely essential. That clause stipulated that Bryce had to issue a public statement acknowledging that he had committed financial fraud against his mother